It's hard to believe how stupid some people can be, defending even terrorists who would gladly kill them. Today in the New South Wales Parliament, in hearings into Jew hatred here, Jews from a hard-left anti-Israel group called Jews Against the Occupation 48 claimed the Hamas terrorist group, which slaughtered 1,200 Jews on October 7, it wasn't a pack of Jew haters.
Hamas and Hezbollah, terrorists or not, are not anti-Semitic organizations, not by their statement, not by their comments, not by their action.
Just to clarify, you don't believe that Hezbollah and Hamas are anti-Semitic organizations?
No. No.
That is an extraordinary statement.
No, it isn't, actually.
So, Mr. Ullman, will you condemn the massacre that took place on October 7?
No. If you have any problem with Hamas's rule, go to Tel Aviv and start arguing with the Department of Defense over there. Hamas's attack was an outcome of Israel's continued occupation.
That impregnable ignorance is so stunning. Let me quote from the actual charter of Hamas, the foundation document, which was rewritten only 8 years ago to hide what Hamas really thought. It says, "The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. With their money," it goes on, "the Jews took control of the world's media. They stood behind the French Revolution, the Communist Revolution. With their money, they formed secret organisations such as the Freemasons, Rotary clubs and the Lions, which are spreading around the world in order to destroy societies and carry out Zionist interests. They were behind World War I, World War II, through which they made huge financial gains. There is no war going on anywhere without them having their finger in it." Joining me is Louise Roberts, Sky News contributor, and also Stephen Trevura, history lecturer and author. Stephen, how on earth is that group not anti-Semitic? How blind are these people?
It's hard to understand why he would say something like Hamas are not anti-Semitic. Now, there is a debate among universities in Australia right now about the definition of anti-Semitism, and that's an important debate to have, because you don't want to define it so broadly that legitimate political discussion becomes chilled. But this group, Against the Occupation 48, they take one of the most extreme views of Israel, and their view is basically that Israel should not exist. And that was a view expressed only 3 days ago at Sydney University at a forum there. A guy literally said Israel has no right to exist. And so they are actually in favour of what's often called a one-state solution. But the one-state solution is basically the idea that the Israelis and the Palestinians all live together in a nice democratic state, which would mean that the Israelis would no longer have a military to protect them, which in effect would mean definite attempts to annihilate the Jews, because that's exactly what supporters of Hamas want. And the idea that the Jews should be annihilated is not a fringe view among Palestinians. So this group is just off the planet, and their actual agenda would almost certainly lead to attempts of genocide.
Look, I really don't get these people. Louise, try to explain them to me.
Well, it defies logic, as we're saying, and I think they don't actually represent Jewish people. They don't represent Jewish Australians who we work with and who we know and who would be absolutely disgusted by this position as well. And the fact that he refused to condemn Hamas in our democratic parliament, I found was absolutely appalling as well. And we know October 7 wasn't about land or borders, it was about murdering Jewish people. So for him to deny there's anything anti-Semitic about the group and who he represents is absolutely appalling.
Look, I've been to one of the kibbutzes that was badly attacked during that October 7th thing. If you've been there and you go from house to house to house to house and see each one having been shot up and burned, shot up and burned, shot up and burned. Here they were killing a grandmother. Here they killed some children. Here they raped someone. Here they kidnapped this person. Civilians, all of them. Civilians, all of them. You cannot but see with your own eyes that this was Jew hatred manifest. I mean, that guy, it's poisonous. But some people congratulate themselves on seeing what others don't, thinking they see further. They don't, in fact, they're fantasizing. By the way, meanwhile, there's been an explosion, Stephen, in the number of people identifying as Aboriginal. Tens and tens of thousands more people in the census call themselves Aboriginal that can be explained by the birth rate. Does that surprise you when, for instance, the Victorian government now announces it is building social housing in Geelong and other centres around Victoria only for Aborigines? These are reserved for Aborigines. And when cheering them on is, for instance, the head of Aboriginal Housing Victoria, Darren Smith, who himself identifies as Aboriginal. Here he is.
I think you can draw a line with early settlement, early colonisation, and the dispossession of people from country. And I think all of those things contribute to Aboriginal people losing their economy, losing their homes.
Stephen, I've got no reason at all to doubt that Darren Smith has some Aboriginal ancestors as well as white ones. But does it surprise you that more and more Aboriginal activists now complain that many other people seem to identify as Aboriginal, queuing up for these goodies when there's no real evidence that they are what they say?
Oh, that's right. And actually, when you look at many of the forms that people need to fill out in order to indicate Aboriginality, the proof required is often very flimsy. Often it's just a tick of a box or, you know, a signature from someone in the community. It might be a school principal, it might be a clergyman. I mean, you know, it doesn't necessarily constitute hard proof for any of this. Now, from 1901 to 1966, the number of Australian Aborigines was pretty stable at about 80,000. Today, it's around about 800,000, and by about 2030, it's probably going to get to about 1 million. And as Gary Johns points out in his book, The Burden of Culture, it's really only about 20, maybe 25, 30% of Indigenous Australians who are actually really severely disadvantaged. The rest live roughly on parity with other Australians. And so what that means is everyone who identifies as Aboriginal in order to receive some benefits, but could actually probably get by without them, is actually taking from the finite resources, but taking from those who really do need it. And that's why these perverse incentives are so bad.
I think
because
it's terrible.
They rob from the most vulnerable people in this country.
So true, so true. Louise, I'm sorry, I've left this a little short of time, this segment. We'll come and make that up to you next week, Louise Roberts and Stephen Trevura.